mentor with over 20 years of experience serving in grassroots organizations. His work centers on building community resilience and advancing design justice, primarily with communities of color. His work integrates community engagement, cultural advocacy, and innovative design solutions to produce projects that prioritize representation, accessibility, and cultural storytelling as a catalyst for social change and community empowerment. In his role at Gensler's mixed-use studio, he led projects that include the Tides Loads of Hope, a project that created the first permanent Loads of Hope laundry room for people experiencing homelessness, the Compton College student housing, one of the first solutions for campus housing at a community college in Southern California, and the award-winning Debbie Allen Dance Academy, to name just a few. He also served as the lead designer for Gallery 19 to 20, a first of its kind art gallery for Black and Brown creatives in South Los Angeles. Kevin is recognized as a national thought leader and cultural strategist, a driving force behind projects that amplify Black and Brown creatives, particularly women in architecture and underrepresented communities in STEM. Through these efforts, he was recognized as a culture champion on the inaugural Forbes The Culture 50 Champions list. Kevin has received many awards that include an AIA LA Best of Design, the Progressive Architecture PA Awards for his contributions on urban onyx, and an honor awards from the Westside Urban Forum Design Awards for work on West Edge. Kevin's works have been featured in the New York Times, the LA Times, Archinet, Arch Daily, Los Angeles Business Journal, and Forbes, to name a few. Since graduating in 2017, Kevin has continued to contribute to the intellectual life of our department. He served as a lecturer in the MSAUD program, teaching a studio alongside Thom Mayne, and regularly joins us for reviews and many other kinds of events. In November of 2020, our NOMAS chapter organized a conference with the theme Equity as Aesthetics, Community, and Capital. Kevin, Natufol, and myself joined in conversation with students and the NOMAS chapter to discuss both the challenges and opportunities of design and design education as a catalyst for social change. In last week's interview with the Hype magazine, Kevin shared some of the ideas we hope to hear more about today. His talk titled Cognitive Dissonance is sure to reflect on the voices that are shaping the future of architecture and reimagining how our spaces reflect history, culture, and community. Please join me in welcoming Kevin back to AUD.
I just want to take a moment and just thank, the School of Architecture for being open to constantly sharing new ideas and ideas that are not holistically new, but haven't quite had a platform to really be unpacked, to really start to push the needle in a way that is productive for everyone at the table. So color commentary is quite literally what you think it means. It's really a play-by-play. It's really a consistent struggle between the known and unknown. But it's really just me as your Sherpa or a tour guide through my mind, but also ideas, symbols, tropes in the Black and Brown community. And so the reason why I offer this visibility into the space is because I think for far too long, we have been divided in a way that doesn't allow us to have productive conversations. There's always a kind of tension that exists. And I think a tension can be great, but when the tension is divisive, it becomes problematic. And I think the nature of it being problematic is because you have too many people code switching. And by code switching, I'm really just talking about speaking multiple language. And to that end, I want to remind people that, there are many people in your day-to-day life that have to code switch and really just kind of undertake a new language. And so you'll recognize, you know, as a trope that I'm wearing a fitted hat, and that fitted hat ultimately is a sign of who I am in my culture. But when I show up to other spaces, I'm actually forced to wear glasses. And you may not think it's a big deal, but the reality is I was pulled over. I wasn't pulled over. I was walked down by officers on my own campus that I teach at. So while you think that it's something ceremonial that I might share, it is for real. And this just happened to me. Not today, not last week, not last month, but inside the last 2 years. I would actually say it was a year and a half. And so when we talk about these things as kind of mythical or larger observations, or, oh, this didn't just happen, that's not actually true. And so cognitive dissonance for me, which is the second half of the title, is really just kind of living in the space where my truths are not recognized in a way that I can proudly stand behind with in concert and or share in a productive way. And so you'll notice specifically on the slide here, there's a use of inflatable objects or balloons. And historically, I want to call into focus the idea of hope, celebration, and aspiration. And so these are more of a trope about the tall order of hope, the ambition of hope, the majesty of hope, but also the reality that clouded in hope is typically a large obstacle that you have to figure out how to move through, around, or on. And so for me, this young person that you see facing the balloons is quite literally me every day of my life. Because every day I wake up and I have to start from scratch. I can't depend on what I've done yesterday, and I can't be certain of what will happen tomorrow. But I do know every day I have to walk up with this childlike ability and demonstrate what love really means, both architecturally, but just as a human. And so cognitive dissonance is my way of really starting to unpack and understand big ideas around who and what I am and what my contributions can ultimately be in the space. And so you'll see here, when I talk about color commentary, it's not just about me and who I am, but it's really about big ideas about elevating and the inspiring people that have done it. And so what you'll see here, because it's March 3rd, is I'm going to transition from me to them. And to me, it's really about talking about and elevating women, because after all, it is Women's History Month. And so if I have to start somewhere, I'll start with the person that did it first for me. And that's my great-great-great-grandmother, who actually lived to 112. And what's really interesting is that she cannot be actually verified how old she was. If she were, which we know how old she was, it just wasn't documented because, as you all know, we weren't always documenting Black people in this country and when they were born. She would have been top 20, 16th oldest in the state of Pennsylvania, 5th or 6th. Think about that. For that type of history, that type of legacy to be lost. The reason why it's really important is because, and I'll share an image of who she was, is that she actually walked from Sanderville, Georgia, walked, didn't get on the bus, didn't take a car, she walked. Her mother was actually a slave. So the point of separation between bondage and liberation were literally her lifetime. Why this is important to me is because when we talk about intergenerational thought, what spatial responsibility is, and what we're ultimately talking about is cultural humility and its ability to be paramount in a discussion when we talk about spatial arrangements and alignment, we talk about a generation. So this is actually my grandmother, Claudia Smith Sheerod. Now Claudia is actually the granddaughter of Anna Cora Gary. And what's valuable about that is we're actually talking about multiple generations. And you may ask me, why am I talking about multiple generations? Well, this young lady actually started an organization, it's a nonprofit called South Philadelphia Homes, where she would actually go and buy dilapidated homes and or homes that were fallen into spaces like the bank would reclaim them. She would buy them and then she would make them whole and then sell them to first-time homeowners. And so to me, if we're talking about architecture, at times we have to be talking about building collateral that exists. We have to be talking about inventory, and we have to talk about the relationship to Black and brown bodies and inheriting space that was not meant for them. And so what we talk about specifically when we talk about Claudia Smith Sheerod is her contributions and what her contributions ultimately resulted in. And the reason why I'm talking about this in a larger canon is because we have to have a larger observation that the work that we do today, while seemingly fleeting and seemingly meaningless, is a part of a larger architectural canon. And so with that, I'll actually talk about my lovely wife, who actually is sitting in the audience with my young daughters. She's doing a similar thing where she actually experienced something that prompted her to go on to create the California Coalition for Health for Black Moms and Babies, which I'm sure she's going to correct me about later, the language there, but it's a statewide program that really starts to ask large questions about why are Black moms dying in the hospital at a rate of 3 times more than their counterparts? And then what is the spatial responsibility? Are those conversations that we need to have in this space? Are they conversations that we need to have elsewhere? But it's the questions that are being asked. And so what I see is a larger consciousness of intergenerational thought that is streamed together in a productive way that questions the very fundamental nature of space that we inherit, whether it's space we do from ground up or if it's space that we do from reclaimed space. And so as I was kind of thinking about that and pulling all of those things into view, it really started to get me to think about the nature of hero and heroism, and starting to think about ideas around pioneer and being a pioneer and what that starts to look like, both spatially, but also as a representation that piques folks' interests. You can have any conversation you want, but if no one is interested in investigating the tropes that are visible, it falls on deaf ears. And so this is actually my wife, and you can see the eyes are the same as the last image. And so I'm really interested in obviously embarrassing her, but also ideas around what it ultimately means to start to prioritize and elevate women for the pioneers that they really are. And what you'll see is that we come in all different, and by we, I don't really mean me and women, but women come in all different sizes, creeds, and all the things. And so while you're seeing Black faces, and I would just ask you, when's the last time you saw Black faces in a lecture? Many of you may say never, and some of you may say last week. But the range is troubling at best to me. But the reason I'm showing these is because it's the most familiar to me. This is not to say that these are the only women to be in view. This is to say that every person should be calling women into view. Now, I want to talk about women as particular to pioneering environments. And so we talked about Black women being 3 times more likely to die in a birthing space. We talked about that. And in architecture, we talk about space, we talk about human comfort, we talk about a lot of the tropes for design. But ultimately, we have to bring back to view the hardships and the trauma that exists. Because when we ask ourselves those questions, we then start to get to the real crux of the issue. And it's not architecture per se, although at times. It's really about us treating the symptoms of issues by and large. By that, I mean, if I have a headache, many of us would say, go take Tylenol or aspirin or Motrin or whatever your choice is. Very few people will come to me and say, oh, you need water. which one should I do? Now, for immediate relief, I'll take the Tylenol, Motrin, whatever. But if I'm actually interested in fixing the issue, I drink water. That's assuming dehydration is my issue. And so what we have is these pioneering women who not only are forced to go through a spatial tension through normative things, things that should be kind of an understood or an accepted, but now we have to think about our offspring. And I keep saying we, but I'm really just inheriting what my wife would be saying to me. We're really inheriting kind of these larger responsibilities, and not just self, but community and people that are in our proximities. And so to that end, we start to think about where women have done the most harrowing things, which is one, at home, in a housing typology or typologically. And what we know is that when we start to think about, and I really want to kind of talk through a larger instance, what we know is, specifically in the Black and Brown community, is that there is a construct of layering that exists. I think we all know that to be in view through some of the writings of Jane Jacobs, forgive me. And so what I want to do is offer an extension to what Jane Jacobs was actually talking about. And I want to bring into view the row home, and just talking about the row home and its proximity to the street. And so many of the lessons that you see will be learned is that the row home typologically has a relentless disposition. It creates a formal grid that consists in its space. And so we can think of it as a Jeffersonian grid, we can think of it as a singular type of grid, but I'll talk about the grid specific to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And what I'll ultimately say is, on the face, they seem exactly alike. They're self-similar in their disposition. But I would remind folks that they're probably as self-similar as a cubes of ice in an ice tray, which is to say that you can pour the requisite amount of water in that ice tray, but when you take those ice cubes out, they will have nuanced differences. And what happens is, when you live in a particular place, people will combine all of you as a single monolith, when it could be anything but the truth. And so what I want to really do is make sure that we reintroduce specificity to the human condition. And to that end, really starting to talk about how we experience the places that we know and love. And I think ultimately we have to really reconsider what it means to think about specific types of moments in urban conditions, where it's, oh, good, bad, crime, not crime. People are really in love with their places and spaces, just like all of you have your own places and spaces that you do know and love. And so I think it's really important that we kind of discontinue the larger narrative where we organize specific areas as problems, good, bad, so on and so forth. Now, I do, because we're on the college campus, want to start to talk about the images themselves. And so what I've actually done with these images, and I'll allow you to decide which ones are which, and I'll tell you why that is. So some of these images were actually created by artificial intelligence. Some of them actually were not. There are two larger questions that I then ask myself. Is authorship necessary, or does it even matter? And what does authorship mean, or what does it mean to curate? Ultimately, what I've decided is, if I can do it, and AI is a tool for an express use of ideas and tropes, then that's what I'll ultimately do. And by that, what that means is, I have kind of, tropes and things like that I'm ultimately always going to illustrate in really interesting ways that don't necessarily have to be my own hand. And the final place I'll talk about is kind of the workforce, and really just trying to make sure that Traditionally, our spaces are kind of designed to comfort, but whose comfort is that? Does anybody have a clear understanding about who we are talking about specifically when we talk about comfort? When you're thinking about a project and you're thinking about an office building, who? Is it everybody, or is it a particular subset of individual that you believe should be in an office? Those are critical questions that we just have to consistently bring into focus and into view. And so we talked about this a little bit earlier, which is really about the big idea around cultural humility and folks' ability to actually engage and or understand based on that. And so at this moment, I want to kind of talk more about dreams and vision. And so dreams and vision, you know, based on some of the things that we talked about, I really want to bring into view that it's not just about talking about what I believe the third rails are, areas of boundary. I really want to start to talk about what we're doing as a mechanism to try to answer some of those questions, or at least join into the conversation. And so this is a conversation that we're having with the California African American Museum, who has a phenomenal director, the executive director. Her name is Cameron Shaw. And we work with Cameron really about the possibilities. What are the expanded possibilities in this place, in this space? Now that we have, let's say, a space shuttle that stands roughly 300 feet tall, creating a large shadow over the facility, what does that then mean for the museum itself? And so this is kind of a series of focus groups that really start to call in the question, what are the expanded possibilities relative to their position? And so what I think is really interesting, worth elevating about Cameron Shaw, is that she actually has an all-female executive team. As a matter of fact, I think they just brought in a gentleman just 9 months ago. It was the first one. And so really just kind of looking at the critical work, the makeup of the curators, the makeup of everyone in the museum, and just recognizing that the team is fundamentally different and their aspirations are fundamentally different. And her contributions to the space, or the future space, is going to be quite profound, because it's a lens that we don't always get to hear from. And again, talking about other teams, My Friend's Place, for instance, which is an organization that deals specifically with young people that are experiencing homelessness from the ages of, under the ages of 18, and they have a kind of in a middle range to 24, giving them, resources that they need real time. This is anything from clothes, toiletries, food, but just really just helping them understand what are the possibilities moving forward. How can we take all of the things that you do so well in this finite space and add to that? And so the way I like to think about that is I like to think about it as the proverbial iPhone. How do we make a better extension of yourself, right? And because the work you're doing is fantastic, I just want to make sure that I arm you with what you need to be and do what's next. And this is kind of APCH's, which is a place called Home, that deals with young people who do not have the infrastructure available to them for education. And so we find that these young people are in a place where they are really talented and gifted, but they do not have the technology to make sure that they reach the ends of what they're capable of. And so I've kind of grayed out all of this, and it's really important that I grade it out, because I don't want everyone to know what they like, what they don't like, so on and so forth. But this entire wall would be filled with green and red stickers. And I want to say that when I'm doing some of these things, sometimes it takes me a day, sometimes it takes me months. But every single time I look at the dots in the notes, it talks about particular personalities. It talks about aspirations. And what I find is that this is a consensus building opportunity, right? And so what happens is I don't put, the executive director and some of the membership in the same room and ask them the same question for fear that the conversation will be swayed by the strongest voice. I try to provide a space that's safe with anonymity, that will allow them to have conversations in a traditionally uncomfortable space. And so for me, this is really about, I don't always get an opportunity to get things built. But as long as I'm kind of pushing the conversation forward in many cases, it's a value proposition, not just for me, but for the teams in which I serve, all women-led. Now, when we talk about dreams and visions, we always talk about what if and what are the expanded possibilities of and what's possible. I want to kind of bring into view our genetic legacy. And I really want to kind of highlight Miss Shelley. I think Miss Shelley just walked in. Miss Shelley is here. Miss Shelley Baxter, who is actually a DNA or a data scientist relative to the social sciences. And what she's been able to do is start to establish a curriculum with young girls that are 16 to 24 and teach them how to fly drones, not just fly drones, but become FAA certified drone pilots. And these FAA certified drone pilots are some of the young ladies that you actually see on this actual page here. And so what you see is they get to use really technical equipment to start to uncover histories that are being quickly swept away through time. And so what's really important and critical about this is that these young women fly as drones with LiDAR technology attached to the bottom to scan the earth and uncover the histories that lay there. Why is that fascinating? Is because many times histories are kind of undermined through kind of weathering by time happening and things falling into to the rear. But these young women are actually starting to record these histories. And so what we were asked to join in and think about is, what does it mean to have a space that allows all of this information, all of this data to be present for however long it needs to be, but what is a technology that allows it to ultimately be used and seen and done and acquired over time? And what we decided was it's really important to create a virtual museum.
Hi, I'm Victor Igbinobaru, co-founder and CEO of Area AI. We have created SIGA, a tool that allows architects, engineers, and designers turn their projects into immersive and interactive stories. Today, I have the pleasure of demoing with you how we have leveraged this tool to turn the We the People Museum into an immersive experience. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to meet you too. Welcome to the We the People Museum.
Thank you. I'd like a brief summary of the We the People Museum, the technologies used, and specifically, how were you created?
The We the People Museum is a virtual space designed to tell the stories of diverse communities and their histories. It incorporates cutting-edge technologies like LiDAR mapping and drone storytelling to create immersive and interactive exhibits. As for me, I was created as the conversation AI metahuman within Aero AI CEGA platform. Built in Unreal Engine 5, my purpose is to guide you through the museum's exhibits and share these global stories with you.
All right. Thank you, Lexi.
Do you
So the virtual museum is really interesting because you have what Michelle has coined historians really starting to create exhibits and artifacts that are particular to regions. And so the historians actually go around the globe. They're not just local to San Diego. They go to Ghana, they go to different places around the world and really start to uncover histories and record them. And they all are stored here. And to me, it was always kind of, how do you take something that exists in a virtual space and really make it a value proposition as a way of storytelling and history? And so a lot about the architecture is quite literally because of the historians. I'd like to take credit for any number of things, but ultimately, I was more of a graphic stenographer. It was really just hearing and understanding what the appetite and the sentiment of the team in order to do some of these things. The other thing I thought it was really important, and I worked on this particular project with Off Top, which is Damar Matthews, and JAF Solutions, which is Josh Foster. We talked about the idea of men, Black men specifically, elevating young women and girls and what that ultimately means and the idea surrounding them. Now, we have any number of rooms. The beauty of this is that this space can consistently update and change, exhibits, all of the things. And the other thing that's really quite powerful and important about this is that the way we thought about it is we thought about it as it's a virtual piece of architecture, but it also needs to be something that is worth celebrating through a gaming experience. And so you can use VR to use this, you can use your cell phone, you can use any kind of apparatus that allows you web entry. And what's really kind of profound about that is that we weren't the only ones to think that this was a really great value proposition, which is to say that as of last week, the week before, I'm not exactly sure when, the San Diego Council of Museums has now accepted the We the People Museum into its membership as a part of its larger network of museums that tell history, that deal with STEM education, but also really start to bring into view different ways of celebrating histories. But the second project I want to kind of talk about is really kind of highlighting who we affectionately call Miss T, Tamara Sandiford, and really kind of her contribution to art and culture. She has been working for 25 plus years in this space where she has gone into schools all throughout California. She's gone through different kind of after school programs, and she's now looking toward creating a more permanent solution for some of her big ideas as it pertains to being available for young people. Now, the project and the building that we're kind of talking about specifically is a former probation office. And, you know, as you can see, we're really interested in a few things, which is talking about transforming kind of like spaces into ideas around liberation, you know, instead of incarceration, liberation through the arts. So we're really just kind of trying to understand what it ultimately means to take a probation office and turn it into a space where folks can dream and ultimately be successful. Now, what I want to say about what Miss T has done, which is pretty incredible, she's basically bought 3/4 of a block. And this 3/4 of a block will be turned into a space that not only edifies and teaches young folks, but it also will be an opportunity, the spaces in yellow, to have people who are in the creative market to lease spaces that are true to that. And so this is really looking at kind of the different businesses through kind of like Black and brown and indigenous folks and people of color. And so the way we're kind of thinking about the project specifically, and we'll talk about the young teams, is dividing the building into two modes, which is performance and education. And performance is really about making sure that creative expression can be celebrated in a more theatrical format. In education, we want to make sure that this is a space where folks can learn and then grow through a multiplicity of arrangements. What that ultimately means is that the space has to be flexible enough for her to be able to do any and everything that they imagine. And so what we ultimately decided was that there has to be a different way of thinking about space, both collaboration, but also what it looks to have dignified resources. And by that, you can see and view the sneaker wall. So the sneaker wall is not a place where you buy sneakers, because remember, we're dealing with folks who are, traditionally ill-considered. The sneaker wall is, if you need a pair, you take a pair. No questions asked. And so what is a dignified solution for someone who needs shoes to grab shoes? See, the thing about bullying is a really particular way of making sure someone is undervalued and underappreciated. Jordans can be the difference between whether I get bullied or whether I'm approved or appreciated in some spaces. It's a very commonly known thing. And so Ms. T, what she's able to do is work with trauma-informed individuals and really understand the mechanisms that cause the harm. So she's not necessarily just trying to give the proverbial Tylenol, but she's really trying to think critically about what it means to provide service. And so not only will this institution provide space for performance and education, this space starts to look at ideas and ways that you can then monetize some of the things that you've learned. And of course, as any performing art space has, is opportunity to celebrate the art itself. And what I want to really bring into view is the cameras that happen to exist in the foreground. Now, Ms. T not only has a performing art space that teaches kind of like the arts, she also has a media team that is homegrown. They train each other to be really valuable in that way. So much so that many of her media team are now, have been certified by Disney to be content creators on their behalf. And so this becomes a cyclical vocational strategy that is deployed. And so everyone who would be standing behind these cameras are all young folks, all in high school. And so what we start to see is spatially, we see some kind of normative things, but the way these spatial tropes are organized or come together really start to ask larger questions about whole. And by that same way, kind of vocational opportunities to really start to record things, right? Now, so what I would say is many people say, oh, that's a pipe dream, that's not possible. How about I tell you that actually the governor records his political cartoon in her building today? It's not a pipe dream. I'm sharing the stories because I think it's particularly helpful to understand behind the scenes what's actually happening around us. And I think it's really up to us to really start to engage these larger conversations one way or another. And then I want to talk a bit about the Debbie Allen Dance Academy, and just talk about the contributions of Miss Allen. It's funny, I'll go in some space and I'm like, oh, Miss Allen, and they'll be like, who? And I'm like, yeah, okay, either I'm too old or there's a problem. I think there's a problem. But I really want to talk about this larger idea around inherited space, and really just kind of looking at space and building collateral that we ultimately inherit. Now this building specifically was an older warehouse, and whenever I see a warehouse specifically in an urban condition, I start to think about the people who must have worked there. And I ultimately identify there were people who did what they had to do to give us an opportunity to do what we wanted to do. And I also believe that it's really just about this idea of making sure that our young people have what they need to be successful, as a method of really thinking and reconsidering what this space was and what it meant. And so I think what the team was thinking, and I think this is a sentiment Miss Allen shared, is that she's really less interested in the exterior of the building, but more interested in making sure when you walk in, everyone comes alive. They recognize it as a safe space, but when they come in, they're safe to be able to do everything they want to do. And so it was a particular problem when you start to think about it from an architectural perspective, when you start to think about, I'm going to be defined by the enclosure, or I'm going to be defined by what this looks like. But what I was really profoundly moved by is her kind of notion of what it meant to be valuable, what the value proposition was to her. It was not that she was interested in doing something for the sake of doing it. She was interested in doing something is because it was instigated by problems that she found dealing with racism in her own journey, but more importantly, her daughter's journey. And so we can actually track back the Debbie Allen Dance Academy in its infancy to an experience her daughter had when she sent her away to go dance. And so what she was interested in is creating something that was referential, creating an opportunity to put your arms around and love on young people. And so what you see as a diagram is that there's a putting of program into this kind of safe space. Now, we didn't want the entire thing to be void of interaction from the exterior, but we wanted to be mindful. In certain places and spaces, windows at head height are problematic. How many of you know when you drive down the street in some areas and there's windows, people can shoot through them? It's not something we have to think about or deal with every day, but it's a reality in some places and spaces. And so we have to be mindful of those things. We talk about designing for people, but we have to go and understand where people are and the problems that people have to deal with each and every day. And so this particular, and I'm not really sure, oh, my screen is showing something completely weird. But we wanted to think about this in a similar way, where we start to identify the kind of like places for, it's just moving on its own, places for movement and edification. So we talk about ideas around performance, education, and flexibility. And then we actually just kind of, and I don't know why it keeps toggling back and forth, but let's just kind of identify it through the plan. You can kind of see, particular to the plan, that there are kind of like compartmentalized spaces that we are interested in figuring out what's a great way to liberate an entire space. Let's see if this works this time. What's a great way to liberate space? Did it freeze? I think it just froze. So while it's thinking about life, I want to really just kind of talk about like ideas around education, performance, and outreach. And so one big idea is that the larger kind of educational mechanism is really about looking at the different classroom settings. And you can see on this plan, there's 5 of them, right? And so these larger tropes about fragmented, fragmented spaces. Oh, there it is. Voila, we did it. Huzzah. Anyway, point is there's 5 particular spaces, and those spaces can be thought of as kind of educational spaces. And then when we turn it into performance mode, you can think about how the studios around can be support spaces that look at kind of ideas around, let's call it offstage, backstage, but also you kind of convert the entire building into a performance venue. And then the third is the outreach. And the outreach is really geared toward making sure that there's ideas around bringing the community in. Now, bringing the community in can look different depending on what your appetite is. And I'll kind of demonstrate how the parking lot ultimately can bring the community in if it's closed and or if it's open, because I think it's actually really quite profound. And so, you know, this is kind of a rendering of the actual building itself, which is quite cool. But then also, you know, we recognize that the space has to do any number of things, specifically with Miss Allen at the helm, because she's very, very, very clear that when she wants to do a production, it has to work in a way that accommodates her ability to produce a show, not just any show, groundbreaking type shows. And so you can see that even the opportunities where there's the point of sale opportunities along the wall then can be moved and adjusted for seating and or rehearsal and or performance spaces. And you can kind of see the larger rendering in view. But one of the things that I think the team specifically is really proud about is that we were able to emulate the rendering with a particular amount of precision, right? Really just kind of bringing into view spaces that are comfortable while hearkening back to the past and recognizing the contribution of their families before, specifically if you live in the area. And again, just thinking about larger spaces and performance spaces and what it ultimately became. Now, what's really interesting about this is that this is still the same plan that I showed you before. There just happened to be styrofoam doors that kind of pulled up into the ceiling that disappeared. And so this is they call it the ribbon raising ceremony. They weren't particularly interested in ribbon cutting, just as a way to think critically about what that ultimately means and the history behind that. This was their ribbon raising ceremony. You can see Miss Allen in the middle. Now, when we talk about visibility from the exterior, one of the things that's really particularly interesting to me is ideas around dance and urban conditions, specifically ballet and urban conditions. And if any of you know my history, I actually came from a dance background. And so it's one of the things that allowed me to think critically about artistic expression was my range of experience at the ballet. People are just kind of like milling about in the parking lot and just taking in, you know, an actual show in the parking lot, which to me is really quite amazing because Miss Allen brings in some of the top talent around the world, right? Like at this particular event, like Samuel L. Jackson was there, right? Like that's incredible that you can have a space and through someone feeling that the space is worth sharing, they bring all of their, you know, all of their friends and loved ones to be a part of such a ceremony.
And they should. And penché, down, stay, big leg up. No, she right here. Here, bang, walk around, very nice. Walk around, beautiful, and slowly let her down, don't drop her. Yes, good, that was so good. Okay, good girl, okay.
Hey, and sharp. It's a straight leg and plie. To be a part of helping to equip this next generation with the tools to be empowered, to have self-respect and a loving environment, to grow and to be creative is really what I think children need to do. They need to have a place to have fun.
And I think that's one of the reasons we've been successful. All the different elements to create a space where they could come and just create. They can be carefree, but at the same time, learning essential skills that could also carry them throughout their lives.
My hope is that young people and people with ideas do not feel boundaries. And we say to the world, yes, we can. Yes, we will. And we're not asking, can we? We're doing it.
And so I thought it was better to hear Ms. Allen share some big ideas around what it ultimately means. And to me, there's such a pride and there's such a joy that you see as she teaches. My sense is that pride and that joy can happen anywhere. But I'm glad that the team she assembled around her was able to rightly think about who and what she's after in a way that's edifying to her. What's really cool about this, and I'm gonna kind of nerd out in the dance space for a second, very small second. When this image here is Miss Allen actually teaching fame to the next generation. When the photography was happening for this, I was standing off on the side, and when I heard what they were doing, I immediately had to excuse myself because the moment was too surreal. My first understanding of Miss Allen is through the movie Fame, but for her to continue the tradition in her own space, it just demonstrated that she's the real deal. She's really living out what she said she would do, which is big ideas around liberation. Now, it's really interesting, and I don't really know at what point this has happened, but I've been working kind of behind the scenes on different television shows and things like that, and I want to kind of bring into view Wendy Raquel Robinson. Many of you may know her, but she's a really wonderful person. Not because she's won infinite amount of awards and she's been in infinite amount of TV and she's been Aunt Regina to all of us growing up. But what's really interesting is that she has an entire arm of things that she's been doing with young people for 20-25 years at this point, where she's teaching young people the dramatic arts. And she has a place called Amazing Grace Conservatory with her sister, Miss Jackie. I think it's really important to understand that there are people who live out loud in one way, but they're really trying to do the work behind the scenes. Miss Wendy is actually put a lot of all of the money, not all of it, but the majority of the money that she got from doing a lot of television into this space, which is geared toward educating future generations of people in front and behind the camera. And this building is actually, I would say, 3 blocks from Miss Allen's building, which is quite amazing. I didn't actually recognize that until like I drove there my first time, but really just helping her to understand, what's next. And so we did a larger capital campaign exercise with her and tried to figure out how we can support her in her fundraising and all the things. And an opportunity came up where CBS came and was like, hey, would you like to do this show? We'll provide X, Y, and Z. Could you do it? And she calls and she was like, well, I don't really want to step on any toes. And I was like, well, since we're here to support you, I'm not convinced there will be toes stepped on. And so she's like, well, would you be willing to work with them? And so behind the scenes, we work with trying to add just a touch of clarity to the space as we prepare to work on our next project. So currently we're trying to secure the location for the building and the actual project kind of collateral that we would need to build it in time. But I'll kind of show you a clip of the kind of before and after. And so some things are just light touch, but they have a profound effect on the membership. And so, and the thing is, it wasn't much. It wasn't like we did a crazy amount of work. Now, I would say Marquise Charles might say different because he spent a serious amount of all-nighters trying to do it, who, I'm not sure if he's here today, but he owns his own construction company, IBC Construction, who was just there to help at every turn. As a contractor, as someone who really just kind of fought the good fight just to elevate a young woman. And I think, these are the type of stories that are worth sharing. And Marquise Charles is actually over at USC trying to get his graduate work done. And then the same is true with, some of the common spaces, architecture and advocacy at USC. Work by and large with the kind of communal spaces. And so what you see is there's this kind of leaning into, making sure that folks in our community have the ability to kind of move forward. And so, I want to kind of shift to Tide Loads of Hope, which is one of the conversations that in the intro, kind of what we talked about. The Midnight Mission on Skid Row has particular programming that asks that there be a laundering service either to come to the site and get the clothes, or they can do it in-house, which is to say there are showers. There are people who live there that are rehabbing for particular things. And when we got there, almost none of the machines worked. Now, yeah, you can say, oh, but did you do the whole building? No, we did a laundry room. And that particular laundry room is able to do 73,000 loads per year of laundry. So every time someone needs a warm towel from a shower who lives on Skid Row, they can go and do that because of a small laundry room. I think what I'm really trying to get in is ideas around reverberating impact. Yes, I've worked on my share of 26-acre projects, actually with Thom, and 5-acre projects, also with Thom. I think those are important. I do, I really do. But I think it's also important to tell the other stories too. The other stories that really seek to find the humanity in places and spaces. And so when I walked into the space, I wasn't really sure how do we help? Like, what does help look like? I thought those were just bags of clothes that needed to be washed, and they are. But what I realize is it's because they don't have washing machines to wash them. So the bags are just piling up because there's no release point. And so we talked to a young lady by the name of Laura Han, who is actually a filmmaker, and she does large commercials and all the things. And she bought in Tide, Whirlpool, and we reached out to Clark Construction and a few other people, and we're like, how can we make this right? And so Tide and Loads of Hope, just to kind of backtrack a little bit, was started because of Hurricane Katrina. And so when we seen what happened with Hurricane Katrina was people were in the Superdome, but if you're in a Superdome, how do you wash clothes? These are the little things that we don't keep in view. We don't. Like the most we keep in view is maybe potable water so we can use the restroom and other things, but clothes, deodorant, little things, dignified things that we take for granted. We started to look at with Tide, and I asked them, what would it take? What would it take for us to figure this out? And they had a really great idea. Laura Hand was like, I'm doing a documentary that chronicles life on Skid Row. If we have the ability to change this as a mechanism to support to that end, I think we can figure this out. And so Tide was like, yeah, sure. Can you do it? And so I was like, absolutely not, but I'm gonna figure it out anyway. I'm gonna try, you know, like I think people believe like when an idea or a project is presented to you, like you know the answer. I never know the answer. That's probably one of the craziest things about me. I'm just naive enough to believe it can be done anyway. Right. And so I'm not really kind of like bogged down with all of the kind of realities, if there were. And so I started to think about like, this is a CMU room, like predominantly CMU, as you just saw. And there's no windows, there's nothing. How do I start to, you know, replicate ideas around dignity? And so I had a big idea around hanging clothes on a laundry line, right, as a way to start to think through what that could be or what that could mean. And Tide bought in, and everything in the space was donated by Tide and Whirlpool, right? So this entire project was funded by them based on an idea. Okay, to be forthcoming, I knew that Tide liked the idea of laundry on a laundry line. Like, I have Google too. But to be completely to be completely fascinated with the idea of creating something that gives people dignified resources through kind of a few hours in Illustrator, sketching and trying to draw clothes on a clothesline. It just really started to teach me the valuable lesson of lifting while you climb, right? Because this was done a couple of years ago to this point, which is the tools you have in your bag, deploy them when you can. And so I'll share a quick snippet of the actual television show. It's actually available on Amazon. What is the free IDMP, whatever the thing is. Any point is, this is available. You can just look up the tent vendor, it'll be there.
Builders, Clark Construction, that we've worked with before, and we're very excited about this.
We're really close because it's in our backyard.
It's not just something that the Midnight Mission did. Like, you know, we did this with the help of our community partners.
It reminds me of Jocelyn and the costumes we all wear. There really is something to feeling a sense of dignity in our clothing. Maybe these little things make the biggest differences.
Start small, think big. Ain't no other better way to live. If you think big and start small, you ain't gotta have a lot to have it all. Slow it down, take your time, cause the sun shines on us all. Start small and think big, y'all. Everybody wants a whole lot of money in their pocket. Big house, a big car, a big boat, a big rocket. More money, more problems, but more money can't solve them. Everybody's in a hurry, get to God knows where. Then they worry about what they're gonna do when they get there. I've been there before, but I've learned more. You gotta start small and think big. Ain't no other better way to live. If you think big sun shines on us all. Start small and think big, y'all. I could worry about tomorrow, but why? I could kick it on the beach, so why not? When I'm with you, I'm in heaven in the treetops. It can't get any better than what we got. So start small and think big. Ain't no other better way to live. If you think big and start small, you ain't gotta have a lot to have it all. Slow it down, take your time, cause the sun shines on us all. Start small and think big, y'all. Easy come and easy go. Easy does it nice and slow. Easy come and easy go. Throw your hands in the sky, let me know about it. Yo.
And so the last thing I really want to call into focus, particularly about this, is that I think at times we take for granted the very service of washing clothes is actually a learned skill. This young lady actually learned this skill at the Midnight Mission and is now using it to serve others. Listen, sometimes we have large problems. Sometimes large problems, hope can be generated in the small things that we do. It's a testament to the resilience of people. We see, even right now, amidst the fires that took out innumerable amounts of homes, goods, memories, the resilience of people, the resilience of the care of community. Our job is simple. It's very simple. We can take an idea and we can bring it into the world. That's the secret sauce. At its crux, at its core, that's what we do. But people who aren't on this campus, or people who aren't doing architecture in other ways, or even design in other ways, it's almost impossible for them to conceive of having an idea and bring it into the world. Us, we do what we can to help who we can. And so I have a million other slides, but I'm going to actually stop for questions. But if you leave with nothing, leave with this. Our ability to care beyond our own perspective, our own sensibilities about what's the value proposition, it really stems from us communing with people. But it also relies on us to bring people in, to have larger conversations. Listen, I get it. I'll be the first to tell you some of these conversations are difficult. Some of the conversations I may not agree with. Some of the conversation I may have hesitance about. But when you think about it, aren't we all more similar than we are different? If we think about the long game, what does it then mean to be in this space? Think about the platform you currently have. Think about how valuable, how much someone would give to be able to sit in your seat. There are people around the world who can't even fathom being in this position. What's funny to me is, while I'm here and I'm behind the stage, is that 17 short years ago, I had to walk 140 blocks a day just to get to school and work, and home, living off of peanut butter and tortillas. Yes, it's difficult. Yes. And yes, the first time that architecturally my ideas are in view, I choose to elevate women. Yes. Why is that? It's because it's an observation. I don't live for myself. I live to understand how I can be valuable to the people around me. And it takes me back to what I just said. It is monumentally important to continue to identify ways that you can indeed lift as you climb. Thank you. Of course. Let's do it.
I was thinking as you were sections of projects that are very realized. There were 3 projects, presentation, for ideas, also participation. And often, I think for those of us, I also, like you, made a very sort of lifelong commitment to education. We're talking many places, architecture education, can do to many kinds of, I don't want to put in careers, because it's still architecture, but there's so many ways in which you can use, leverage, and function as part of architecture education. They don't all look at sitting in an office deciding what is. So I was wondering if for, some of our younger audience, I was wondering, because the work is started, and I know you've done it to, white institutions, some are very much grassroots, and others have a lot of resources. And they might choose us and I for decisions, use those resources. And I was curious to hear from your perspective. I wonder if there are organizations that come with more resources versus the ones that are more about, people who really find needs. People that have interest in having architectural career in the foreground, ways of engagement. These kinds of projects. Do you have any advice on where to start? What kind of institution, like how does it need to be before, they don't have to plans to have this space, I love the way you talk about use the tools that you have to help. Advice.
Works. Yeah, so I think one of the big things I would advise folks is really be clear about what you're interested in, right? And the reason why I say be clear about it is because it's important that you understand why you're doing something. Because if you can't explain why you're doing something, you'll never be able to execute the rest of it, which is the how and the what. Like you can't. People won't get past the why. What I've been doing is finding people who have similar ways of seeing the world and similar ways of thinking about creative expression and really starting to think about them in a more familial way. And so I always talk about the idea of the transaction, right? And how, the relationship has to be stronger than the transaction. And how that ultimately means that you can have a transaction, but the relationship should be more important than the transaction. That's the way I think about it. And the reason is because when money gets tight, the transaction relationships seize up. They dry up quick. The relationships, it's a conversation. Hey, it's tight. All right, look, do this, do that, blah, 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 whatever. What I would say is when you're looking to find the kinds of work, be proximate to the kinds of people that are currently doing it. So for instance, if I wanted to do something in a community, if the first time I show up is with boards and a project, I'm already behind. Already behind. So if I know housing is something that I want to do, you should probably show up to a few kind of like community meetings. Oh, I don't know where they are. I don't know when they are. Well, that's a part of the job. Part of the job is to know, to find out. Right. The other thing you can do is you can associate with different membership communities, right? So, you know, obviously NOMA has been a long-standing version. So if you're interested in working in particular areas of hardship, they ultimately know and are able to help you identify who's doing what and when. But there are other ones that, for instance, like film and media, right? I'm sure there are multiple clubs on the campus that deal particularly in that. Now, the way that I've kind of like stumbled onto some of this work is really because either one of two things. One, someone just knew that I was just passionate about doing all types of work. And I'm really interested in the problem and solving kind of ideas around community, one thing or another, right? And so, for instance, Miss Wendy, the reason why we have a relationship is because one of my buddies, who's also from Philadelphia, was doing the electric slide with her in the street. And so there is no, it's really just about, and I say this probably far too much, availability is your best ability. If you're interested in, you have to be proximate to whatever it is. So if you're interested in community activation and all the things, like you probably are going to show up at one or two block parties or something like that, or you're going to show up to different activist events, so on and so forth. If you're interested in film and things like that, reach out to people who are in that space and ask them, what are you doing? How are you doing it? So on and so forth. I think ultimately what we find is, if you're passionate about a particular thing and people can understand what that particular thing is, they're more likely to help you get to that end, or they're more likely to hire you to do some of the things that they're interested in. Because ultimately, like if for instance, like the film industry, I'll talk specifically about CBS. When we started working on that project, the young lady who was supposed to be, you know, the kind of like chief designer sent through, and I think Marquise, let's see, Marquise can tell you, she sent through a Word document of what she thought the space should be. And Marquise emailed me like, what is this? And I was like, oh, it's a Word doc. And he's like, how am I supposed to build this? Well, beyond me. But the point is, like, we have the tools and the resources that when, you know, a friend reaches out and asks for help, or when Miss Wendy asks for help, you can be in view. And a lot of it is really just like, I'd like to give it off to chance. But you don't go do the electric slide in the street by chance. You were already going to do the electric slide no matter what. So the likelihood that somebody would have a conversation with you about the electric slide is fundamentally different. And what I'm trying to really get at is that it's not a chance encounter if it's who you are and what you were going to do anyway. Does that make sense? Yes, I can tell you the formula to how to nurture a relationship, but that's not valuable because you'd be trying to do it like me. What the benefit is doing it like you. What are you interested in? Where are the places and spaces that you're elevated and not just tolerated? Because that's the number one thing that we find is people who find themselves looking for is because they're in places that they're tolerated, not celebrated. That's the reality. You don't see me a bunch in places that I'm tolerated. Because if you're just tolerated in spaces, they were never going to pay you. They were looking for your counterpart. I walk into lots of rooms because I have to. And some of the things that I hear about me and my race on calls, open lines, people who run large portions of places and spaces, they don't want me there. They don't. But I was never particularly interested. I was doing it because of the check. if I'm being complete, I'm doing it because of the check. But the places that I'm celebrated in are the places that I typically get these kinds of cool opportunities. So hopefully that was helpful. Amazing.
So your lecture today was really truly inspiring and kind of gave me like a new perspective in terms of like understanding the teachers. So thank you so much for that. And my question is, was there some for like dance studios, I see that you have like connections, you're interested in it, you have like experience with it.
Yeah.
So this point, is there like some pieces that you want to yellow bit, or can't we that like yellow from it, I think how we inspired.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great question. I think first is that it's never just me. It's not. I wish I could bring in view the scores of people who help realize some of these projects. But I wouldn't have the time to thank each and every person, but bringing, you know, who's at the table in view is really important. And so when you think about, you know, a project like, let's say, Studio T Arts and things like that, like the best way to unlock my, you know, my locked brain is to literally go see young people perform, at particularly her young people, right? And videos like what Miss Allen, we just saw with Miss Allen, like those motivate me to no end. Hearing the passion around what the aspiration or the idea is so profound to me. It unlocks who I am as an individual. And I also I can remember in my mind's eye, specifically to dance, me in the same place. I quite literally, if it wasn't for like dance, gymnastics, and all the things, I lived in South Philly, I would have likely been a statistic. But that's where I was every single day after school. Every single day. Not Monday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Sunday we had off because, you know, I don't really know why we had off on Sunday, but sometimes we did when production was up. But so I know intimately what it means to be in those spaces day in and day out, and that they become a new type of home. They change your kind of familial relationship. The young people that you grow up with are never forgotten. One thing that I think is really important, so not only Wayne Thomas, Ryan Eiley, who's here, Seanson, and a bunch of other people who like really like help maestro all of the things. I actually knew some of her dancers. Some of her dancers were my teachers growing up. Anthony Burrell, for one. He was the youngest African-American, well, all African-American, at Alvin Ailey, right? The youngest person at Alvin Ailey. And he was one of my teachers and were rehearsal masters. But he is one of Debbie Allen's favorite people for the hot chocolate nutcracker. And so there are relationships that are, you just don't know, they're really informal. And so to me, it's like, if you are doing what you do and know it in the spaces that you know, connections and relationships happen. And so ultimately what I've seen is, and so like, I'll be like, oh, you did this, that, and the other. And he was like, oh, no, I know her. Let me call her for you. Please don't call. Please don't call. Yeah. So the idea is that it's more than just kind of a linear stream of consciousness. It's always, there's multiple connections. Just like when you share information, if I give you a fact, you may or may not remember that. You may retain it for a few moments, maybe a year. But if I give you a story, there's so many other different ways that connect it. right? And other kind of inferences and things that you can associate it with. Thus, you're able to recall it. And a similar thing is true with relationships. If it's really just a transaction, it's all about the business. And so it's facts and figures. People that you typically do business with have 100 other business things that they're doing. So you just become another thing. But if it's a relationship, there's so many other ways of contact and, you know, association that helps you kind of stand there. But your question originally was specific. Yeah, just my wife laughing at me like I always rang. Your question specifically is just that. What high school? Amazing. Are you hoping to go here? We'll talk about that afterwards. We'll figure that out. Yeah.
So. Sometimes we don't dig the biggest value looking at the slides. It's a representation of for example, like, you know, Kevin's the type of person that will just call you randomly and be like, hey, you good? And have like it turned into like a 2-hour sermon for a second. Like, you know,
It's factual information.
It's who are gathered in he's in the midst. This is one of those situations where like, it's coming from a place of like really caring about the value of the value. And I'm just one of like, you know, new relationships, and I'm sure that he has across like the spectrum. You know, it's touching. And I'm really, guess I'm blown away at, you know, the ideas that coming forward that so to take precautions. Stay silent. You know, this I protect. So that's good. So I guess my question would be that's good. At the same time too, this one, even putting on to a project like that is just like, you know, staying true to his word. Hey, can you beat this kid? Yeah, but never have done a full build out in like 24 days. But just to have somebody believe in you that much that you can have is a necessity to it. So I guess for somebody who is so small,
yeah.
How do you, I guess, how do you bring something like this to a level where it's actually like
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question.
like what would be like?
It's a good question. No, thank you for asking the question. One of the number one things that I think as a profession we have to remember is that we constantly are dealing with forces that are constantly coming at us, and we're always trying to mitigate or solve problems. One thing I think we don't do as much as we could and or should do is find the value proposition. It's like I told you with the midnight mission. Did I tell you I paid for any of that? Did I tell you that they paid us for any of that? What I told you was we talked to Tide and they liked the idea, so they bought it. You see that? So the value proposition for that was actually them making a commercial. It was self-motivating that they could make a commercial that talks about a place in Skid Row and all of the things and all of the eyes that they would ultimately get onto the project. So that's why they paid for it. We uncovered what makes them tick. Now, one might say like, oh yeah, but isn't that performative? Yes, but most companies are performative. Think of it this way, and I think I shared this probably too much too, is if you've ever been to anywhere with a decent rail system, let's say New York, let's say Philadelphia. I'm just kidding, let's say New York, because many of you have probably been to New York. You know, you can get on at one end of Manhattan and get on the train, and that train can be coming down, it can get on another, and another person gets on, and you both are riding the train because it's useful for both of you in the moment and the time. But then you get off that train, and that person continues on, which is to say that you were going in that direction anyway. We just coexisted in a valuable way to support both of us, but we both got off where we needed to get off and got to the same end. So value proposition shouldn't feel like reaching in a crocodile's mouth trying to pull a tooth. It should be more synergistic, where everyone understands where the value or the benefit ultimately is. Does that make sense? And so it's really just to reframe the way we treat conversations. I always tell people, if you go into a conversation expecting to win, you're never going to get the maximum benefit of the conversation, because conversations inherently are about transmission of ideas. Does that make sense? The person who's receiving the idea doesn't have to agree. The only thing you can ask is that they understand what you're saying. Does that make sense? And so to me, it's really about reframing and understanding what the value proposition ultimately is. That's how you do it. Of course.
And I think the person I have is given the range of the projects and down to one identify priorities, right?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. You know, to me, the way that I start to identify like the value proposition is, what is the essence of the problem, right? And so it allows me to catalog all of the things that we could potentially use in the particular project. But having a fine-grained understanding of the essence of the project allows us to really distill it down to a point where it's, oh, if I don't have this, we're not actually talking about that anymore. Does that make sense? So if the idea is hope, if I whittle it down, is this a space that promotes hope? Or if I whittle it down, is this a place that supports dignity? And so to me, it's always just identifying a framework that allows me to make the decisions that will ultimately determine the actual and I don't want to call it a solution, but I want to call it the point of departure. Because I think what I learn is the more and more I do, the better and better I get at it. So if I had to do one of these projects over, it would be different, but it would be better. And so to me, it's really just, I think that's actually a great thing because if the projects would be the same, then you'd be like, yeah, you're not growing at all. But the other thought is that, particular to scale, and this is why it's so helpful to have a team around you, is because I could, and sometimes it's the same day. I can come off of working on a stadium and they're like, oh, here's the Loads of Hope room. And I'm just kind of like, okay, like, it's just, the scale is just like the jump is too big. And so just, people who you trust to tell you like, you're losing your mind is really important and valuable to me. Like that accountability is really special in my mind, because what it does is it lets me know that it's not a self-promoting, decision. It's if we're gonna figure out the essence of this, that's not it. And so I have people that are always around me that tell me I'm losing it. And I think that's probably the bigger crux of it. But I think ultimately establishing a framework for the essence of what the project is and understanding at what point that essence is then distorted. The other thing I'd say is like, who are my funders? What is their underlining understanding of what we're doing? Because the way they understand it, the way I understand it, are fundamentally different. We just have a vehicle that we are in agreement with for a short time. So understanding, so for instance, if I had to talk about Tide, understanding like what their aspirations, like they need to shoot a video. So quite literally, we could have just put a logo anywhere on the wall and been fine. They would have donated the machines. The machines also have their name and logo. So there are a lot of things that we could have, even taken out or reduced down. I think the only thing we were interested in is like, okay, we have to cover all these walls because there's nothing but CMU everywhere. That was the only, we have to do that. And I went to every kind of vinyl print maker that I knew, and I landed on one that I always use in Hollywood. It's actually in Burbank. And they're very, very good at like making sure it's the same team that I use for the jet installation for Mamie Till's the Till movie. I think you all know that, but that's the one that I use for that. And actually I have that in here, but that was like 30 more slides down. So you're welcome.
Thank you so much. For dinner, right?
Huh?
We're going for dinner.
You want to go for dinner?
Well, I have a reservation of course. Thank you so much for it. I'm gonna go get my stuff from my office and then I'll come back here. Okay.
That thing was amazing. Thank you. I appreciate it. It was just like and everything. Like I knew bits of it, but just like the first time I see it in like intellectual concept.
It's the first time I see it.
You know?
Oh, really?
This is the first time in my life I'm seeing a student.
I appreciate you.
It's good.
Yeah.
Wow, you know, this climate with.
Yeah.
You gotta get them wrong. Right. I want to say, hey, Lauren, thank you for your wife, for my way out. Your baby.
Five and 26.
Thank you so much.
I just want to say, like, I feel like, we don't like, it's going to say, it changed forever, you know?
I she would close her eyes.
When my children are right now, this is great. It's great.